Welcome back to Urban America Horror, and if you're new here, welcome too. As always, if you have your own story to share in the next episode, send it to Urban America Horror or email us. You can find the details in the description below. I'd love to feature your story right here. After all, it's stories like yours that keep this show alive and spooky every day. Now be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're new and ready for more creepy and truly weird stuff. Today is my birthday, and the father of my child is going to die, just like all of the others. I hate my birthday. This year is no different. I awaken feeling full and wrong, too weak to pull myself into a sitting position. My pillows are filthy, the blanket draped over still stained from my last birthday. Jasper, I whisper, blinking at the ceiling. It's my birthday. I feel him stiffen, his body curling into itself. I pretend not to notice his trembling, goosebumps prickling his bare arms. Before I can comfort him, the door flies open. We both jolt upright, Jasper reaching for my hand under the blanket. The lights flicker on, too bright. Jasper's eyes widen, his lips parting in a silent cry. He's scared. I know he's scared because my birthday is the day he will die. Darling! Mrs. Tilsey enters the room, holding my 9th birthday cake, her lipstick smile lit up between flickering flames. I force a smile and blow out 9 candles as my children gather around my bed, their smiles wide. I don't even know their names. Their fathers were dismembered in front of me. I can still feel each father's blood, warm and slick on my skin. I can still hear their shrieks for mercy. I was taken as a birther when I was in college. Birthers are part of an ongoing epidemic of women being kidnapped by families who cannot have children. Mrs. Tilsey was friends with my mom and has known me since I was a child. When she realized she was barren, Mrs. Tilsey took matters into her own hands. Sometimes I can hear my mother upstairs laughing. I wonder if she knows her missing daughter is down here, that her neighbor's beautiful adopted children are actually her own flesh and blood. The darkest parts of my mind whisper that, your mom always known. Who do you think recommended you? The first daddy was Cam, a college varsity boy who sang me to sleep, promising we'd escape with our baby. But then he was shot through the head, his blood staining my blankets. His varsity jacket became part of me, part of my birthday. Every father since wears it. Jasper, wrapped in the bloodied blue and gold jersey, says nothing, only tucking a strand of my hair behind my ear. He is yanked from the bed, the chains around his wrist jingling. I don't scream when his throat is slit open. Mrs. Tilsey is very surgical and precise with her kills, her eyes never leaving my bulging stomach carrying her child. 6 hours later, I'm screaming, trying to find Jasper's hand, but he's gone. His body is already in a trash bag, being dragged from the room. I give birth to a beautiful little girl. Mrs. Tilsey snatches her away. When I wake up the next day, a new father is curled up next to me, wearing the Letterman jacket. He's already drugged, kissing my neck. In the doorway, Mrs. Tilsey watches, rocking my baby in her arms. She can't wait for my 10th birthday. We drove out to an abandoned field and we saw something horrifying. The station wagon lurched along the deserted back roads, its engine a low growl that seemed to echo through the dense fog clinging to the outskirts of town. The city lights were long gone, swallowed by the dark. Robert Usted's eyes flicked repeatedly to the rearview mirror. There was no one behind him, but he kept checking, just in case. He gripped the steering wheel, fingers stiff and pale, jaw set tight. Paranoia had seeped into every thought, every nerve. He wasn't escaping. This wasn't about getting away. This was about proving a point. One final message to the ones who had hunted him, who had turned his life into a cornered animal's nightmare. In the back seat, 2 small bodies lay crumpled and limp. The soft glow of the dashboard threw their faces into harsh relief, empty eyes staring into nothing. There was a metallic smell hanging in the air, sharp and bitter. It hadn't been planned, not really. He just wanted to keep them safe, to protect them from the people who were always watching. But his own hands had betrayed him, his rage blinding him. And now what was left of his family was gone. It was too late to turn back. His wife sat gagged beside him, eyes glazed over. She had stopped crying hours ago. There was no pleading, no desperate attempts to get through to him, just silent tears and the rise and fall of her chest. She knew he was beyond saving, lost in the labyrinth of his own fears. The car swerved suddenly, tires skidding on loose gravel as it veered off the paved road and onto a dirt path. It kicked up a cloud of dust that hovered like a ghost in the taillights. Ahead, the outline of a fence materialized in the darkness. Beyond it, a wide, empty field stretched out under the moonlight. Skeletal trees lined the far edge, their branches like claws reaching for the sky. An old barn sagged in the distance, a hulking shadow against the pale light. This was it. The end. He turned to his wife, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. "They'll remember this," he whispered hoarsely, his voice almost swallowed by the night. "They'll remember what happened here." The device beneath his seat was crude, hastily assembled from pipes and wires, packed tight with potential. It sat there, waiting. All it would take was a turn of the key. One twist and it would be over. A single flash, and they would never forget him. She didn't react, didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, staring through the windshield unseeing. It was as if she had turned to stone, her spirit drained. There was no fight left in her, no defiance. What was there to fight for? Her children, pale and still in the back seat, were beyond her reach. The last shreds of her resistance had crumbled away. She was empty now, a shell caught in a nightmare that had no end. Robert's hand hovered over the key. His breathing slowed. This place, this field, these trees, would become a marker, a scar. He could see them out there, hidden in the darkness. The ones who had driven him to this. They would understand. He would make them understand. His lips curled into a thin smile, his grip tightening on the key. The explosion shattered the night. A violent, blinding burst of fire tore through the vehicle, metal folding inward like paper. Shards of glass and twisted steel rained down as the flames roared, engulfing everything. The blast seemed to consume the sky itself, a towering inferno that burned brighter than day. Then silence, the kind of silence that felt final, the kind that smothered everything. Smoke billowed up in thick, black plumes, blotting out the stars. Somewhere deep in the pasture, horses whinnied in terror, their dark shapes bolting in every direction. Their hooves pounded the earth, a chaotic rhythm against the stillness of the night. The field, once peaceful and quiet, was a smoldering ruin. Shattered glass glinted in the firelight, and twisted metal lay strewn like bones. The barn stood untouched, a silent witness to the madness that had consumed Robert Usted. All that remained was a charred shell and the acrid scent of scorched earth, a testament to a man who had lost everything and left nothing but destruction in his wake. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft rustle of pages being turned, the occasional crackle of the fire, and the low rumble of distant thunder rolling in from the horizon. Each of us sat around the cozy living room, hunched over our own copies of Paranoia, eyes fixed on the lines describing the final, horrific moments of Robert Usted's delusion-driven rampage. The words painted vivid, gruesome pictures in my mind. The shattered glass, the fire, the blood. It was the kind of story that gripped your chest and refused to let go. As I turned the last page of the chapter, my hand trembled slightly. Stacy's voice broke the tension first. "Holy hell," she breathed, lowering her book slowly, as though the weight of what she'd read still lingered in her hands. "That was intense." She looked up at us, wide-eyed, the excitement in her expression tinged with something darker, a sliver of fear maybe. She brushed her hair back behind her ear, as if trying to shake off the lingering discomfort. "I can't believe they managed to capture it so well. The dread, the absolute madness of it all." Axel nodded, his own copy closed now, resting on his lap. He glanced at her, then over at Margaret and me, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I think I need a drink after that," he joked, though his voice held an edge of unease. "It's like I can feel the crazy radiating off the pages." Margaret set her book down gently beside her on the sofa, her gaze distant, unfocused. "It's tragic," she murmured. "The children, the wife. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for her. I mean, knowing she was going to die and just not fighting anymore." She shook her head slowly, hugging her arms around herself. Reading it made me feel sick, like I was there in that car, feeling everything she must have felt. "I know," I agreed quietly. The flames of the fire seemed to cast long, wavering shadows across the room, making everything feel a little less real. The author really captured it. The sense of isolation, the paranoia. It was like you could see into Robert's head, see how the world twisted and warped around him until he didn't know what was real anymore. Stacy leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her eyes alight with the kind of excitement that only comes from being scared and fascinated at the same time. "That's what makes it so powerful, don't you think?" she said eagerly. "It's not just some gory crime story. It's the psychology of it all. The way it crawls under your skin and makes you think about how easily someone can just snap." She paused, then grinned. "That's why I wanted us all to read it." Axel's smile faltered slightly. He glanced toward the window, where the first faint flashes of lightning lit up the sky. "Well, you've succeeded," he muttered. "I'm definitely freaked out now." He glanced back at Stacy, raising an eyebrow. "But that's not why you brought us together tonight, is it?" Stacy's grin widened, a mischievous spark flickering in her eyes. "Maybe it was," she teased. "But maybe I also thought it'd be a good idea for us to, do a little field trip. A way to, what's the phrase, get some closure." Margaret stiffened beside me. "You're not serious," she said softly. "You don't really want to go out there, do you? To that place? Well, why not? We're only a couple of miles away from the exact spot it all happened." Stacy shot back, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "We've been living with this story for weeks. We're all caught up in the fear, the mystery. It's just a field now. It's not like anything's going to jump out at us." Axel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. I knew he felt the same pull I did, a strange, almost magnetic curiosity. But there was something else too, something that made my stomach twist with dread. I looked at Margaret. She was staring at Stacy like she'd lost her mind. "It's just an empty patch of land," I said slowly, "and the only thing we're likely to find there is a chill from the wind." "Exactly," Stacy said, leaning back in her chair, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "Don't you see? That's why we have to go. We have to finish what we started. It'll be like closing a chapter." The storm outside rumbled closer, and in the flickering light of the fire, no one moved. No one spoke up to say it was a bad idea. Even Margaret, who looked the most apprehensive, remained silent, her eyes shifting between the rest of us, waiting for someone else to call it off. But no one did. "We'll go now," Stacy murmured, almost to herself. She stood up slowly, like someone in a trance. "Before the storm hits, we'll go, and then we'll see what's really out there." A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed it aside. We had gone this far. There was no turning back now. The night air was heavy as we stepped out of Axel and Stacy's warm, comfortable living room and into the chill of the oncoming storm. The faint scent of rain lingered in the wind, mixing with the crisp scent of freshly turned earth and distant pine. The sky above was bruised with deep purples and angry grays, lit intermittently by flashes of far-off lightning. I could feel the storm's charge pricking at my skin, as if the very air itself was alive with anticipation. Part of me wanted to stay behind, to make up some excuse and wait it out by the fire. But another part, one I didn't want to acknowledge, urged me forward with morbid curiosity. We piled into Axel's car, nerves jittery, none of us speaking as the engine roared to life. The interior of the car was warm, but the tension was suffocating. Stacy was up front, staring out into the gathering darkness like a woman on a mission. I exchanged a look with Margaret beside me, who gave a tight, uneasy smile. She didn't want to go either, but we'd all made this unspoken pact the moment no one objected at the end of dinner. Now we were all prisoners to our own pride. The drive out to the pasture was longer than I expected. The streets grew narrower, winding through fields and clusters of trees, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. We passed darkened houses spaced far apart, their windows like blind eyes staring out into the void. Walla Walla was a small, quiet town, but this felt different. Our hometown now seemed abandoned, empty in a way it never had before. With each turn, the storm crept closer, flashes of lightning illuminating the road for split seconds before plunging us back into a hollow darkness. Thunder rumbled, louder now, a low growl that reverberated through the car and settled deep in my chest. "I can't believe we're doing this," Axel muttered suddenly, breaking the silence. He glanced back at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes shadowed and uncertain. "You know it's probably just going to be an empty field. Nothing to see but grass and an old fence." "Then why go at all?" Margaret shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. I could see her grip tightening on her knees, fingers digging into the fabric of her jeans. "Because we have to," Stacy said softly. Her gaze was still fixed straight ahead, unblinking. "Because it's part of the story. You know how the book ends, right? We're almost at the last chapter." "Yeah, in the book," I pointed out, trying to keep my tone light, but it came out strained. "This isn't a novel, Stace. There's no closure out there, just an old crime scene and a creepy pasture." "Exactly." She turned in her seat, eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "It's been 30 years. Maybe it's time to put the story to rest. For real." No one had a response to that. I looked out the window instead, watching the trees blur by as the road narrowed even further. The last thing I wanted was to traipse around some dark pasture where a man had killed his family. But I couldn't bring myself to say it, not when everyone else seemed determined to see this through. Finally, we turned down a dirt road, the tires crunching softly over gravel. By now, the sky had shifted from dusk to night, but the moon was low enough in the sky that its light skirted below the black clouds, illuminating the ground with an eerie, unearthly glow. Axel slowed the car, squinting out the windshield as the headlights washed over a barbed wire fence and a stretch of empty pasture beyond. The field looked almost silver under the moonlight, the tall grass rippling gently in the breeze like the surface of a dark, shimmering sea. "This is it," Axel said, his voice barely above a whisper. We got out of the car slowly, as if we were afraid of disturbing something, some delicate, invisible thread holding the world in place. The wind tugged at my clothes and I could taste the storm on my tongue. Thunder rumbled closer now, the sky flickering with bursts of pale, cold light. The four of us stood by the fence, peering out into the expanse of the pasture. In the distance, I could just make out the faint outline of trees, black and skeletal against the horizon. The grass swayed and whispered softly in the wind, as if murmuring secrets we weren't meant to hear. "It looks normal," Margaret said quietly, almost like she was afraid to be proven wrong. Stacy nodded slowly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. I couldn't tell. She reached out and placed her hand on the top wire of the fence, the metal gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Let's just go a little way in," she said softly, "just to say we did." None of us wanted to be the one to refuse, so we followed her lead. We slipped through a gap in the wire, the grass parting softly around us. It was colder here, the air biting and sharp. Each step felt heavy, like the earth itself was trying to drag us down. Axel and I took the lead, our footsteps muffled by the thick grass. Stacy and Margaret stayed close behind, their silhouettes flickering in and out of focus as the lightning flashed above. We moved deeper into the field, the fence receding into the distance behind us until it was just a dark line against the horizon. We came to another fence, this one lower than the last one behind us, perhaps 4 feet tall. It was made up of horizontal metal bars spaced apart, leaving gaps just big enough for a person to squeeze between them. It was a cattle fence. At one time, the bars were probably painted a bright color, but now they were rusted and corrupted by time. Stacy passed right by Axel and me, and without saying a word, she began to try and climb over the fence. "That's far enough," I said, finally allowing a sliver of reason to win over my conscience. Stacy scoffed at me and looked at Axel with an expression that told him to give her permission to proceed, but he sheepishly refused with another nonverbal cue. "Cowards," she muttered as she stepped down. The night seemed to press in around us, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. Stacy stood beside me, peering around like she was searching for something. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all froze, straining our ears. For a moment, there was only the distant rumble of thunder. But then, faint, almost imperceptible, I caught the sound of something moving through the grass. A soft, shuffling noise like someone, or something, was wading slowly through the tall stalks. "It's just the wind," Axel said quickly, though his voice shook slightly. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the field. "There's nothing out here." "Then why do I feel like I'm being watched?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, tight with fear. I didn't answer. I was too focused on the sound, the way it seemed to come closer, then fade away, only to creep back in again. A chill crept down my spine, every nerve in my body on edge. And then, as if summoned by the very thought, I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, a pale blur against the dark backdrop of the field. My heart stuttered, and I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. But no, there it was. A figure, ghostly white and shimmering faintly in the moonlight, standing near the far end of the pasture. It was too large to be a person, too solid to be a trick of the light. My throat tightened as the shape shifted, moving slowly toward us. "Hey, look at that!" Stacy's voice was bright, almost excited. She stepped up onto the bottom rung of the fence, balancing with one hand on the top bar as she squinted out into the field. "It's just a horse." She glanced back at us, grinning, clearly unimpressed. "See? Nothing creepy here, just somebody's stray farm animal." Axel seemed to relax beside me, his shoulders loosening as he peered out into the dark. "Yeah, she's right. It's probably just lost or something." He turned to Margaret and me, raising an eyebrow. "See? Nothing to worry about." But Margaret didn't respond. Her grip tightened on my arm, nails digging in through my jacket. "It doesn't feel right, Jeff," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling grass. "There's something wrong with it." I couldn't shake the same feeling. There was something off about the way it moved. Too smooth, too deliberate, like it was gliding rather than walking. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "We should leave," I murmured. "Right now." "Don't be ridiculous," Stacy shot back, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just a horse, for God's sake." She raised her voice, her tone playful, almost mocking. "Hey there, horsey. Come here, sweetie. Come on, come say hi." She started making soft, coaxing noises, the kind you'd use to call a pet. Kissy sounds, little clicks of her tongue. I watched, my stomach nodding with unease, as the horse seemed to pause, its head tilting slightly in her direction. Then slowly it began to move again. The odd thing was, it didn't look like it was moving very fast. It was almost ambling, the way a horse might stroll leisurely across a paddock. But something about the movement was wrong. It was getting closer, quicker than it should have been, covering more ground than its slow steps should allow. One moment it was a distant shape on the far side of the field, and the next it was halfway across the pasture, its form blurring at the edges as though it were slipping in and out of focus. "What the hell?" Axel muttered, his voice tight with confusion. He leaned forward, squinting at the horse. "How is it moving so fast?" "It's not," Stacy insisted, her smile faltering slightly. "It just looks like it is. Maybe it's the moonlight or, I don't know, fog or something." She glanced around, her gaze darting over the dark expanse of the field. "It's just a trick of the light." But even as she spoke, I saw her expression change. She stepped up higher on the fence, her hand still outstretched. "Come on, horsey," she called softly, though there was a tremor in her voice now. "Come here." The horse obliged, or at least it seemed to. It was closer again, closer than it should have been. Its body shimmered faintly in the moonlight, its pale coat almost glowing. But the closer it came, the more details I could make out, and the more wrong it looked. The legs were too long, the joints bending awkwardly. The head, which had seemed so horse-like from a distance, looked distorted now, the muzzle stretched too thin, the ears set too far back. I took an involuntary step back, bumping into Margaret. She gasped, clutching at my arm. "Jeff," she breathed, her voice trembling. "That's not a horse. Stacy hesitated, her gaze locked on the creature as it continued its surreal approach. For a second, I thought she'd back down, that she'd see what we were seeing. But then she huffed, rolling her eyes in mock annoyance. "Stop being such babies," she said, though her voice wavered. She turned back to the creature, putting on a wide, forced smile. "Hey, horsey, come on, come here." The horse stopped abruptly just a few yards away. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensing. Its head lowered slightly, and it seemed to be looking at us. No, not us, at Stacy. Its eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on her like it was studying her. "Okay, that's close enough," Axel muttered, reaching up to tug at Stacy's sleeve. "Let's get out of here." But she didn't move. Her hand was still outstretched, her fingers trembling slightly. "Come here, horsey," she whispered, almost pleading now. And then the horse tilted its head, just a fraction, enough for the moonlight to catch on its face. And what I saw made my blood run cold. The mouth, oh God, the mouth stretched too wide, the lips pulling back in a grotesque parody of a smile. Rows of teeth gleamed wetly in the pale light, jagged and uneven. Its eyes, which had seemed almost normal from a distance, were pits of darkness, bottomless and empty. "Stacy," I croaked, but my voice was a thin, useless thread of sound. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. "Get down, now!" But she didn't seem to hear me. She was frozen, staring at the thing in front of her, her arm still reaching out as if caught in some horrible trance. The horse, or whatever it was, shifted again, its head tilting the other way. Then slowly, impossibly, and without moving its smiling mouth, it spoke, mimicking Stacy's voice in a low, haunting, twisted whisper. "Hey, come here. Come say hi." It sounded too low for us to hear, but all of us did, deep within our ear canals and in our chests, and that's when she screamed. Simultaneously, Margaret fell down, her chest colliding hard with the cold, damp ground, as though she had been pushed by an invisible force from behind. It was then that the deafening sound of running, stampeding horse hooves filled the air like an explosion. Yet the white horse remained hauntingly still, glaring at us through its unearthly eyes. The sound shattered the silence, raw and terrified, echoing across the field. Axel lunged forward, grabbing Stacy around the waist and yanking her off the fence as I helped Margaret up off the ground. Stacy struggled for a moment, her limbs flailing, and then she seemed to snap back to herself, turning and bolting toward the car. "Run!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Run!" We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted back toward the car, the grass whipping at our legs, the wind howling in our ears. The horse, or whatever it was, remained where it stood, watching us with that awful, predatory smile. But even as I ran, I could feel its gaze burning into my back, following us all the way. We piled into the car, Axel slamming the door shut and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and with gravel kicking up, we tore away from the field, leaving that horrific, twisted creature behind. But even as the car sped down the narrow dirt road, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The sight of that pale, grinning face watching us go. Back in the car, we sat in stunned silence, the interior heavy with an unspoken fear that none of us wanted to address. Axel was clutching the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, staring blankly at the empty field beyond. Stacy, for once, was speechless, her face pale and eyes wide as she exchanged a horrified look with Margaret. Did you see its face?" Margaret whispered finally, voice shaky. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," I managed. That wasn't a horse. Hell with its face. Did you hear that thing speak? It fucking spoke. Horses don't speak like that," Axel said frantically. We sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The air in the car felt suffocating, and I could see everyone else was just as rattled. Stacy was the first to break the silence. "We need to find out if there's a horse that lives here," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "What, you want to go back out there and knock on someone's door?" Axel snapped, turning to glare at her. But Stacy was already shaking her head, a wild glint in her eyes. No, we'll call them. If it's a horse they own, we'll get an answer tonight. If not, well, I don't know." "Why would anyone keep a horse like that?" Margaret muttered. It looked wrong, like it was sick or, "Let's just get back home first," Axel said, plunging the car back into silence. After pulling into Stacy and Axel's driveway, we sat for a second, contemplating all that had occurred. Axel was the first to get out, and the rest of us followed. Once inside, we found a phone book and watched as Stacy flipped through the thin, yellowed pages. Finally, she found the address. There indeed was a house on the property we just hadn't seen. Stacy read the address aloud, matching it to the field's location. It was them. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number listed in the directory. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, curt and weary, like she'd already been interrupted one too many times that evening. "Hello? Hi, ma'am," Stacy stammered, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Sorry to bother you so late, but we were driving by your property and we thought we saw a white horse out in your field. We just wanted to make sure it hasn't gotten out." There was a pause, an uncomfortable, drawn-out silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I leaned closer, holding my breath, straining to catch every word. Then the woman let out a long, exasperated sigh. "For the last time," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "We don't have a white horse." My heart dropped. The way she said it, like she'd been repeating it for years, like people had been asking her the same question over and over, sent a cold, prickling chill through my entire body. "What do you mean?" Stacy asked, confusion and fear lacing her tone. Are you sure? Because we..." Click. The line went dead. We stared at the phone, stunned. Stacy looked up slowly, her face pale as a ghost. She just hung up on me," she whispered. "Because we're not the first to ask," I murmured, dread coiling in my stomach. "People have seen it before." The silence stretched out for an eternity. I looked out the window and rain had begun to soak it. I imagined the rain falling onto the ground of that field, where the horrible crime had taken place so long ago. I hoped that the life-giving water would wash away the stains of the past, and maybe that thing would go away. But I knew better. Evil like that doesn't just wash away, it lingers. The creature was there because of the sins of Robert Euston. That horrible act had tainted the ground of that place, and only something unholy could call it home now. But that made me wonder, what the hell had we seen? Thanks for tuning in to today's horror story. If you have a horror, mystery, or haunting story you'd like to share, send it to us at Urban America Horror. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here waiting for your next horror story.